digital literacy, which was discussed here, digital payments, and this morning there were issues about women's use of ICTs and violence online. So these are some of the issues that we looked into when we studied the Open eGovernance Index, which we developed. By the way, yeah, so I will be discussing with you its background, the different dimensions that we looked at, the methodology, and how this could be applicable also to India. Because when we did the study, India wasn't included. We just piloted it actually, and perhaps in the future what we can do is expand the study further. So I don't know if there's no government here, right? Anybody from government? It would have been good, because this actually looks at how ICTs can work both ways. Government, what are the policies, practices that they do, and then how civil society, businesses, and the private sector can use technology to engage with government so that we can modify policies and then develop further. So anyway, so just to give you a background about it, so yeah, we've been talking so much about the internet and how it is a driver for development that's being used not just by the private sector but also by government, and we are all connected now. Well, at least majority of us. And then what is we looked at what's the impact of ICT-enabled network societies when it comes to the issue of democracy. And then we're also, these days, we talk a lot about openness. There's open access, open internet, open data, etc. And how do all this, so there are a lot of discourses that are ongoing in relation to governance, in relation to openness, in relation to transparency. For instance, there's good governance that looks into. We also talk about, aside from good governance, there's a lot of discourse ongoing when it comes to digital rights, social technologies, etc. And we also find that recently there have been plenty of existing indices that measure how ICTs are being used by government to engage the public for the to come up with efficient service for the public. So you have the eGovernment Index that was developed by Brown University, and then the United Nations have their own eGovernment survey. Perhaps you can check where India ranks in that. You have the e-participation survey, e-readiness survey, ICT Development Index, which the International Telecommunications Union does every year. The Network Readiness Index of the World Economic Forum. There's the eGovernment Index by the Waseda University, and a lot of other indices. And they measure countries in terms of how services are being given to the public, how government is using ICT to engage the citizenry, and yeah, and they rank countries in terms of that. But when we were looking at the different indices that was discussed, we found that they focus more on infrastructure and usage of ICTs only by governments and businesses. But what about aspects in relation to legal, policy, and regulatory frameworks that enhance the concepts of openness? Like we have, as I mentioned earlier, open data, open content, open spectrum. And then also the existing indices there was lack of analysis on the political, economic, and socio-cultural ecosystems and how they enhance or perhaps hinder strategic use of ICT. And also, there's not much data on ICT use of civil society as intermediaries between states and citizens. So that's why we developed the Open eGovernance Index. We started, it's not something new. We started it in 2009 to 2011 when IDRC gave us some support. And we piloted it in 4 Asian countries. Unfortunately, India is not one of them. Philippines, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Pakistan. And Pakistan is supposed to be part of the phase 2 of the project. Unfortunately, they were not able to make it because they weren't able to get the visa. So anyway, from the learnings of the phase 1 of the OEGI project, we developed the phase 2 of the Open eGovernance Index to update the framework that we developed before, which I will be sharing with you later on. Perhaps you can comment on it, and especially in terms of the methodology, and see how it can also be applicable to India and other countries. So this time, while in the first phase we tested it only in 4 Asian countries, this time we tested it in 5 countries, 3 of them from Asia. 2 of them were the Philippines and Pakistan, at least, were part of phase 1. And then we also included a country from Africa and 1 from Latin America, in Colombia, and then Uganda. So, yeah. We came up with an assessment tool of how to measure open e-governance, and then each country did a research on their own. So we compared the results of the different countries to come up with a synthesis paper. And of course, now that we have the index, what about it? So the outcome is we wanted to see how countries ranked actually, and what can be done about the different policies that they have. So these are the different dimensions that we measured, actually. So meshed government, the e-participation channel, digital inclusion, ICT empowered civil society, and then we'll also look at the open legal and policy environment. When we say meshed e-government, what we mean is the different policies and practices of governments in using ICT internally, and how they are able to pull together the different agencies under a common interoperability framework within which they work. So for each dimension that we look into, we have different indicators which we measured. Now, for instance, when we talk about the meshed e-government, we looked at is there a national e-government framework or plan? Is there an enterprise architecture? Is there government interoperability framework or plan? Are there open standards policy? Is there open data policy? Is there data policy or data protection policy in the country? What about when it comes to online transactions? When filing, when doing payments, you have e-payments, procurement, filings, and then are there institutional mechanisms to oversee the different government plans, and how are the existing e-projects being implemented actually? So I don't know how perhaps you can think about how India would fare when you have all these indicators